Tánaiste, attacking a €7 increase in welfare payments in 2009, you said it was the meanest possible increase, and said that if it were the Titanic, it would be women and children last. What an apt description of your budget. There are very many inequitable decisions in the budget, and I want to focus on two today. By decreasing the fuel allowance, which is means tested, and is only
one
paid
topic at a time, please.
And is only paid to lower income households. You have created a situation where retired bankers and other high-end pensioners saw no change in their welfare payments, while all of the low-income households, obviously Deputy Rabbit thinks it's great fun.
I think it's hilarious.
Well, I know you do. I know. In other words,
thank you. Sorry, could I have it? Deputy O'Crieff, please. Deputy O'Crieff, we can't go through the whole budget now. This is leaders'
I have to say that hitting the weak at the expense of the rich does not seem to me, Deputy Rabbit, to be fun. And I would like to ask the Tánaiste, why are you protecting the rich at the expense of the poor? And the second question I want to know is, there is a lot in this budget that's focused against women, and I'll just give one example. The Minister has pencilled in a saving of €45 million in a full year by a change in the rules of eligibility for state pension. Based on her figures, this could affect over 50,000 women, mainly women, people, 90% women, from September 2012. Put simply, anyone who during a normal working life took time out to rear children or care for elderly relatives will see their pension entitlements decreased by €30 per week.
Thank you.
Just because they reach pension age after the 1st of September 2012.
Thank you, Deputy.
What does this say for the mass that the Labour Party have on Mrá na hÉireann? And why are we penalising women who contributed so much to our society?
Thank you. We're over time.
Could I ask the Tánaiste to explain to the House why women were targeted in so many ways by Minister Burton in the budget?
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, I think that is very rich coming from Deputy O'Crieff, since his party proposed €300 million extra in cuts in the budget than was actually implemented by this government, and had proposed €190 million extra in cuts in the social welfare budget than was actually implemented by the government. In very difficult times, and everybody understands these, this government succeeded in bringing in a budget that does not increase tax on working people, that does not, contrary to what Minister O'Crieff implies, cut social welfare, basic social welfare rates, and does not, as Minister O'Crieff asserts, protect the rich at the expense of the poor. In respect of, there are no measures which are targeted at women. Any of the changes, any of the reforms which are proposed in this budget apply, insofar as they apply, for example, in the area of pensions, they apply to men and to women. There is no specific measures in respect of pensions which apply to women. In respect of the changes which are proposed with regard to eligibility for pensions, the number of qualifying contributions which are required, they can be made up by looking at the contributions of either partner where a couple is married. The budget and the measures that are contained in it are balanced measures. And I think the government has made this clear, that where there have been some measures that have had unforeseen consequences, the government has been very much prepared to look at those measures on their merits and to make adjustments where they're necessary.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Deputy O'Crieff.
Tánaiste, does a cut in the rate of contributory old age pension, in your language, not constitute a cut in rates? You say that applies to men and women equally. That is totally disingenuous, as everybody knows that the proportion of women who start work, leave it for a period and then go back into work is much higher than in men. And therefore this cut, because it's not about the total number of contributions, you're showing an abysmal lack of knowledge of the social welfare system. Because if you started working at 55 and you work for 10 years to 66, you'll get a full contributory pension. However, under Minister Burton's arrangement, if you worked from 25 to 35, took out from 35 to 55, and then worked from 55 to 65, you will lose $29.80 in your pension entitlement for having taken the gap in the middle.
Sorry, there's a question.
And therefore, it is not a question of the number of contributions. It is a question of the averaging of those contributions over your working life.
Thanks, we're over time.
And I would suggest you would read the Social Welfare Code before you start making ill-informed statements.
Thank you.
Now, you say this budget
we're over
is not
time now. Thank you. We're not
what about
making
child
statements,
benefit,
please.
one-parent payment allowances?
Deputy, I don't think you heard me. We're over time.
I know, yeah, but
it's
I'm trying
question time.
Yeah, I
it's
know,
not,
but normally
I don't want any statements here. Thanks
I know,
very much.
yeah,
Put a question.
but like normally you don't actually have to inform the minister about his own policy.
No, well, not that leader's questions. Thanks very much. If you want to give him private lessons afterwards,
your widow's pension,
that's your business.
In other words, I'll send you the list of all the cuts you've made that specifically focus on women.
Thank you.
And my question is, why did the minister focus so much on targeted cuts against women and children and disabilities in this budget?
Thank you.
Well, first of all, the Deputy is simply inaccurate. The budget does not target women. That is simply untrue, and you are simply making an unfounded political charge. There have been no cuts in the basic rates of social welfare payments, including pensions. The rates of pensions are the same in this budget, after this budget, as they were before it. And incidentally, Deputy O'Keefe, that is the first time in over 3 years that we haven't had cuts in social welfare rates. Your government, no, hold on a second now. Your government introduced cut after cut in basic social welfare rates. Let's understand this very simply and very clearly, Deputy O'Keefe. There have been no cuts in basic social welfare rates. You're now trying to conflate the qualification, and I do know the Social Welfare Code, and I know it very well. And you're trying to conflate the contribution requirements, the numbers of contributions which are required, and trying to make a case based from that. The contribution rates for pensions is 260, and that is the equivalent of 5 years' work, which can be made up, in the case of somebody who's married, can be made up from the contribution rates of either partner. And you should stop. And you should stop. You should stop making assertions that are simply untrue. Basic social welfare rates have not been cut in this budget, and the amount of cuts that you would have implemented was €190 million more than this government implemented.
Deputy MacDonald, please. But just sit down, Deputy. Thank you. Deputy, don't be getting yourself upset. It's Christmas. Sit down there, really, please. Deputy MacDonald, please. Thank you.
We're making it up.
Deputy MacDonald, can you hear me? Thanks.
Give him another run at it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I couldn't actually hear you.
I know it's difficult. I know that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Tánaiste, I've raised this matter with your colleague, Minister for Education, Ruairi Quinn, and the matter was raised with Taoiseach yesterday. I'm hoping this will be a case of third time lucky. You claim that your budget was balanced. You claim wrongly that it didn't have negative consequences for women and children in particular. You claim that the pupil-teacher ratio is left untouched. When you drill down into the detail of your nasty budget, what you discover is that in fact 428 teaching posts from the most disadvantaged schools in the most disadvantaged communities across the state are in fact to be cut. Minister Quinn, I understand, has explained this away with the rationale that he doesn't have a magic wand. You have said yourself that where measures have unforeseen consequences that your government has shown willing to reconsider them. Well, Tánaiste, this particular vicious cut has foreseen predictable consequences for children living in the inner city of Dublin and Cork, in Inishowen, in Limerick, in Waterford, places that you know full well have suffered the consequences of intergenerational poverty, unemployment and a plague of drug misuse.
Question, please.
Now I want to ask you, Tánaiste, in your position as in government, but particularly as the leader of the Labour Party, to tell this Dáil that you will have this cut reversed. To tell this Dáil, as the leader of a party who I understood was wedded to a notion of equality, as leader of a party who has elected representatives in many of the constituencies and communities that will be devastated by this cut, that you will in fact reconsider and not offer alleviation measures, but actually reverse this cut.
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, again to correct Deputy MacDonald, the pupil-teacher ratio in primary schools has not been increased. The pupil-teacher ratio. You know, would
you just wait to hear the reply? Thanks very much.
You know, it's quite remarkable. It's quite remarkable that the best that the opposition can do in attacking the budget is to make things up. The pupil-teacher ratio has not been changed in the budget. What the deputy is referring to is a situation of legacy posts in a number of schools. Now, Minister Quinn, Minister for Education, is very well aware that some schools will be particularly impacted by the withdrawal of legacy disadvantaged posts. For that reason, he met with a group of school principals on Tuesday so that he could listen directly to their concerns about the impact of this measure on their schools. And he has confirmed that there will be a number of posts made available for alleviation measures for the schools most affected by the changes as set out in the budget announcement. The Minister has undertaken, as part of the existing alleviation measures, to ensure that DEIS Band 1 junior schools will be placed on a staffing schedule based on an average of 1 teacher for 20 pupils. This will enable them to continue to have smaller class sizes for the youngest children starting school. 32 schools that have legacy posts that provide for 1 teacher for every 15 pupils in junior classes only will now have a staffing schedule that operates on the basis of an average of 1 teacher for 18 junior pupils. The special position of DEIS schools will also be recognised in adjustments to the general allocation model, which is used to allocate learning and language support teaching posts to schools. All schools will be notified in January 2012, 3 months earlier than normal, of their staffing entitlements under the new arrangement, including any alleviation measures that may apply. And this will allow schools to plan for the school year beginning in September. The removal of the legacy posts, which will be managed as sensitively as possible, given current constraints, means that the resources available for DEIS schools can be spread evenly so that all children in these schools are treated equally and equitably. The Government's protection of disadvantaged schools is underlined by the maintenance of €13 million in enhanced funding for DEIS schools and €2 million in school book funding for DEIS schools. All of these areas have been protected from reductions in expenditure for 2012, and in addition €26 million is also being provided from the Homeschool Community Liaison Scheme.
Thank you. Deputy MacDonald, 1 minute.
Tánaiste, you accuse me of making things up. I wonder when the principals came to meet your colleague if he equally told them that they were making things up when they set out, I'm sure, in very, very graphic detail the consequences of moving from a 15-to-1 pupil-teacher ratio to 22 as it was then envisaged. Even the response that you've given now still indicates that teaching posts will be lost, and that children who rely in the first instance at primary school level on direct intervention and small class size to have a chance, not just in educational terms, but in social and life terms, will be compromised by your government. You say that these are legacy posts. Well, please don't come in here and insult the intelligence of this Dáil or the intelligence of the general public with that kind of a connivance. What will your legacy to the education of these children be? And I find it ironic, deeply ironic, that Labour in government this time seeks to sabotage the work done by a previous Labour Party education minister. And I have to say, Eamon Gilmore, you're some piece of work to talk about fairness, to talk about equality, and the perverse logic articulated by you today that you have to have an equality in deprivation. There's a reason why these particular schools were given
Deputy, you mightn't have heard me.
Pupil-teacher ratio, and all of the documentation reflects the fact that that size of class is working for children who need.
Deputy, would you please put your question?
So how can you with any honour, as Tánaiste, with any honour as the leader of the Labour Party, say to the children in Sheriff Street,
Deputy, would you please put your question? We're not making statements.
The Inchone Peninsula, that these are legacy matters.
Deputy.
That's some legacy for you, Tánaiste.
I don't know what the supplementary question is, but however.
But the Tánaiste knows full well.
I think Deputy MacDonald is either hard of hearing or is simply heedless. I mean, you know, to come in.
We've got the answer. We have the answer now.
You know, I think it's. You know, I think it is. I think it's.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You know, I think it's fair enough. I think it's fair enough of Deputy MacDonald to come in and raise the issue of the pupil-teacher ratio and the allocation of teachers in disadvantaged schools. But I think it's a bit nonsensical that when I give an answer and explain what is being done, you then come back at me with the same rant you would have given as if I hadn't given the answer in the first place. Now listen to it. No, please listen. Please listen. Please listen. You know, there is an important quality, I think, in the work that we do as public representatives, and I think that is to have an ability and a capacity to listen. Now, in this case, that is a capacity that the government, and in particular the Minister for Education, exercised. When the issue of the way in which the reduction in teacher numbers in disadvantaged schools was going to impact was raised with him, he met with the principals of the schools directly, and he heard directly from them what the impact was going to be in their individual schools, and he asked for that to be set out in greater detail. And in response to that, he has made it clear, as I've said, not that the pupil-teacher ratio in these schools will be 22, as you have asserted here, Deputy MacDonald. He has made it clear that he will ensure that the DEIS Band 1 junior schools will be placed on a staffing schedule based on an average of 1 teacher per 20 pupils. He has made it clear that in the case of the 32 schools where there are legacy posts for less than that at the moment, that measures will be taken to ensure that the pupil-teacher ratio will be less than that. He has made it clear that the special position of DEIS schools will be recognised in the adjustments of the general allocation model, which is the method that is used in his department to allocate teachers to schools to reflect the disadvantaged nature of some schools. In order that there isn't going to be practical problems in relation to this, he has asked that he intends that the allocations will be made in January of this year, which is much earlier than is normally the case, so that if there are difficulties identified in individual schools with the allocation of teachers, there will be plenty of time before these come into effect in September. And Deputy MacDonald, you know, I and the Labour Party do not need any lecture whatever from you about the protection of pupils, and the protection of the pupil-teacher ratio, either generally in the primary education sector or particularly in the area of disadvantaged schools. The position of pupils in disadvantaged schools, the special needs and special requirements that they have, the additional resources that are required in disadvantaged schools will continue to be recognised by this government, will be addressed by the Minister for Education, and we will listen. We will listen, Deputy MacDonald. The Minister for Education, let me assure you of this, the Minister for Education on this matter is going to pay far more attention to the reasoned arguments and the reasoned cases which are made to him by the principals of the schools than he is to some kind of a political rant which is given by you here in the floor of the House.
Deputy Shane Rath. Deputy Shane Rath. You're not involved in this yet, are you? You want to rejoin and say, take over from Deputy Ross. Deputy Ross, please. Thank you. You're preventing your leader from speaking. Let your leader speak, will you?
Thank you, Carola.
Thank you, Deputy Ross.
Thank you, Carola. I'd like to address a different matter, which is budget related. But I think in the last week we've seen signs that some of the government's quangos are showing signs of going walkabout. Now, I applaud the Minister for Health's attempts to keep the VHI in check and to attempt to bring down the price premium increase, which is proposed to 50%. But I think there's a more dangerous development, of which we're pretty unaware at the moment because of the budget. On the 5th of December, Brendan Hanlon, your colleague, announced that there would be a cut of 21 million in the subsidy to CIE. On the 9th, that was obviously an attempt by the government, first of all, to raise money, and secondly, to increase efficiencies in this quango. On the 9th of December, 4 days later, CIE, all three companies, were given a price increase in fares. One of those increases, which is to come into effect in January, was a 15% increase in Dublin, in the price of fares in Dublin. And this was granted by another government quango, the National Transport Authority, with uncharacteristic speed in 4 days. I'd like to ask the Tánaiste how we can allow a cut of this sort simply to be passed on immediately to the consumer. Yesterday, we introduced a property tax, to our shame, which is €100 a year. If this is introduced in January, it'll cost those people spending less than €20 a week on their bus fares or other transport fares more than the property tax. So I'd like to ask the Tánaiste this. Would he please instruct the National Transport Authority to reverse this decision and to tell CIE, which is, after all, the most wasteful of all government quangos, to keep their prices the same and to make their company more efficient and to reduce the malpractices which have been rife there for years.
Thank you, Deputy Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, the issue of fare increases is something that is discussed between CIE and the National Transport Authority, and I don't think it's an accurate presentation of the position that that was done only over a 4-day period. The issue of fares is something that is discussed between CIE and the National Transport Authority over a longer period of time. I noticed too that that Deputy Ross made no mention of the fact that the Minister of State at the Department of Transport this week also announced the introduction of the long-awaited integrated ticket, something that's been going on for a very long period of time, and which will enable passengers on the different public transport systems in Dublin to use a single ticket across all areas of transport, which is a way in which commuters and public transport users will be able to reduce the cost of their journeys. And certainly a commuter who is using the public transport system on a regular basis will be able to make savings in that respect. Deputy Ross, I think, is aware that savings have to be made across all government departments, and the Department of Transport is no different. I would agree with him that CIE and its companies do have to be run on an efficient basis, and that's what the government expects of the companies. The issue of the fare increase, as I said, is a matter that is one which was the subject of discussion between CIE and the National Transport Authority.
I simply don't accept that the government can wash its hands of this. The National Transport Authority is an agency. The government appointees are on the board. The CIE is a semi-state company. Government appointees are on the board. Both are controlled by the government. And they're doing a nice little friendly tic-tac between each other, and the government saying, we have nothing to do with this 15% fare increase. It's the way the quangos work. And it's a fundamental problem here that if a semi-state is not being run properly, and God knows CIE has had problems. How much did this LEAP system, which you're talking about, cost, Tánaiste? I think it was over 40 million to introduce it. 40 million. This is the company that spent 500,000 on a secret report which it wouldn't even tell its chief, the last minister about. It's in dire critical need of reform, and there is no reason for giving a 15% increase to a company which is run like this. I'm asking the Tánaiste again, does the government accept any responsibility whatsoever for this 15% time bomb, which is going to come up and bite you next month after the property tax does? It's going to be a worse problem for you when people realise it and they're paying these fares on the buses.
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, with regard to the integrated ticket, yes, the introduction of the integrated ticket was something that was subject of discussion for a very long time. You're right, Deputy Ross, it went on for far too long and cost too much. Minister Alan Kelly managed to get that introduced in the space of a short number of months, something that the previous government couldn't do over the period of a decade. So let's first of all, you've been talking about it. You've been talking about it for 10 years, spending a huge amount of money on doing it. Minister Alan Kelly got that done within a short period of time of a few months, and that will.
Please stay quiet. Thank you. Santa Claus is coming next week.
That is something that will help public transport users to reduce their transport costs, and in particular those who use public transport on a regular basis, which is the example that has been cited by Deputy Ross. With regard to the National Transport Authority, you can't have it both ways, Deputy Ross. You can't, on the one hand, say that government shouldn't be politically interfering or intervening or micromanaging the work of commercial state companies, or that the government should not be micromanaging the work of individual state agencies. You can't say that one day and the next day then come in here and say to the government that you want us to direct those agencies.
Thank you.
The issue of fares, the issue of the setting of fares is a matter between CIE, its companies and the National Transport Authority, and it is not something that the government is directly involved in.
That completes Leaders' questions for today.